The Pacific identity really gives that space, the Nasara or the Talanoa, is that we're all equal in the future's space because it hasn't happened yet.
Hey, welcome to the Futures Workshop, a series of conversations with the world's leading futurists about the tools they've created and how we can effectively use those tools in practice. Your podcast host is Victoria Mulligan, set up in Tamaki Makaurau, Auckland, New Zealand. Kia ora.
Kia ora.
So this is episode 5, an odd-numbered episode, which means we're talking to one of these futurists. And who do you have for us today?
Today's guest is Sarah Mecartney. So Sarah and I met for the first time when I was moderating a panel she was speaking on around re-indigenising the future at the Dubai Future Forum. Sarah brought the room to life, really, with her energy and her insights on how Indigenous wisdom can more meaningfully shape and create better and more equitable futures. And to be honest, she hasn't stopped inspiring me since then.
Yeah, and she's done all sorts right around the world.
She has. She's Regional Director for Melanesia at the Pacific Community, and she's spent over 20 years navigating what is a particularly complex world when you're working in international development. She has worked with the UN in public policy and strategy, and her career has spanned from the Pacific Islands to Afghanistan. But what really stands out about Sarah is her deep commitment to incorporating really diverse perspectives into everything she does, and making sure that futures thinking isn't just an academic exercise, but a participatory, democratised process, and one that really honours the traditions of her Pacific heritage.
So what can we expect from the conversation today?
It was cool. It was very cool. We went pretty deep into what it means to blend the ancient with the modern. We laughed, we shared stories, we explored how Indigenous wisdom can help us rethink the systems and the structures, the tools and the methods that we use to shape our world. So it was one of those conversations where you'll feel this. You'll feel her warmth and her authenticity in everything that she says. So I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful that you enjoy this conversation as much as I did.
Great. Here's our conversation with Sarah Mecartney.
Welcome to the Futures Workshop. Hi, Sarah.
Greetings, Victoria.
How are you today? And where are you today?
I am well. I'm calling in from Port Vila, Vanuatu.
For our Northern Hemisphere listeners, can you tell us a bit about Vanuatu, where you are?
Vanuatu is the centre of the universe. It's us a good futures place. We have to be agile. We always have to be prepared. And we always know that working together, we are stronger. Vanuatu is a high disaster risk area in that we have 9 active volcanoes. We're in the pathway of cyclones. We had 2 Category 4 cyclones last year within 3 days. So we know a lot about recovery and preparedness and resilience. But we also know that working together always brings good outcomes.
And how long would it take you to get to a beautiful beach if you got up from your desk right now and started walking?
Well, I walk quite briskly. I'd say 5 minutes, for others maybe 10. But always welcome. Please come and visit us when you can, and we'll show you. We can all measure out that walking distance to the beach.
Cool. Great to have you with us. Can you tell us a little bit about the tool that we're going to talk about?
Of course. I'm going to be talking about backcasting, which is a future backwards tool. And I'm really excited to share the experiences from the Pacific Community, or SPC, and perhaps do a little bit of a shout out for our Pacific Pathfinder Toolkit as well.
Awesome. Tell me, what is the SPC, Sarah?
The Pacific Community, or SPC, the S is a silent one, is a science and technology and innovation organisation. It's member-owned. We have 27 members, including 22 Pacific countries and territories. We work across a multitude of sectors in all sciences, And also in our innovation, our leaders have led us to the practice of futures and foresight in the ways that we work.
Oh, can you tell me why does the SPC need to care about futures?
Why shouldn't anyone care about the future? I think in times of great complexities and disruptions, and also from a Pacific organisation, really thinking about the legacy that we leave for the next generations and thinking intergenerationally, it's been really important to dig into futures to see how we can best prepare now in the present for our future.
And before we jump into the backcasting tool, which I'm keen to hear a bit more about, tell me a little bit about your Pacific Pathfinder.
So short history. We have a strategic plan, as many organisations do, and so it's really largely a lighthouse for where the organisation should be investing its resources and its services to the Blue Pacific. Again, our members who provide us with important thought leadership asked us as an organisation to test futures and strategic foresight in the co-creation of our strategic plan. So we worked with Meta Futures and Sahel, I'm sure many of you know of him, and ran through a large number of the tools and workshops to put together our strategic plan. And from that experience as well, we decided that it would be really helpful, not just for the organisation, but for others in our region, to share our experiences. It's really reciprocity is an important part of our work. So whilst we were taking people's ideas, we also wanted to give back, not just in a strategic plan, but in a toolkit. And so that's where the Pacific Pathfinder came. And we've really worked hard on using really plain language, try to step away from jargon, share our experiences and our tips on how we went about these exercises. We also thought about our audience. Are we working with people in government? Are we working with communities? Are we working with partners? So I hope we can put it in the podcast notes where you can find it. We've also worked to make it accessible. We're also translating it into French as a second language of the Pacific community.
Wonderful. Hey, Sarah, there is tons of foresight and futures toolkits out there. Why do you need one that is specific to the Pacific?
Oh, good question. We thought about it because we were inspired by a lot of other toolkits out there. There's some fantastic toolkits which we also used, which we also tested. And so we thought, if we're going to do a toolkit, what's going to be the standout? And what we thought in the Pacific, it's really been about applied futures. So whilst we have a lot of philosophies around futures and lots of deep thinking and learning, the real ask, and this was also during COVID times, it's like it was the so what factor. What change is actually going to happen if we use this? And so therefore, our focus on the application of futures, not just for policies or for strategies, but sometimes personal futures, but also futures within the family as well. And so we just thought this is such a great field of work that can really shift the dial. I always call it getting stuck in the pothole of indecisions and procrastination, and just having futures really helped us push mindsets, push imagination, and get moving again after a period of circular conversations, shall we say.
Yeah, cool. And just to dig a little bit deeper into that, what does the Pacific way of being and doing add to the Futures Toolkit?
Another great question. So when we first started testing futures within our organisation, there was a fair amount of resistance in a new tool, in a new language. And so if I back up a little bit, it was all about context. And so bringing in the Pacific culture and Pacific philosophies, it was, they bring much curiosity. I should say I'm a Pacific person. But we bring a curiosity and we have an ease with cultural approaches. And there was a lot of connection with, and I'm not going to butcher anybody's language, because everyone has a version of this proverb about walking backwards into the future with the eyes fixed firmly on the past. And with that, knowing that we're here now to create legacy for our descendants, just as our ancestors have done for us, that Pacific way of knowing and doing is quite natural. So there's a lot of ease with thinking about the bigger picture, a lot of ease with thinking about through metaphors, a lot of ease with role playing and laughter. And I think that's my one takeaway, is that there was always a bit of laughter, or always a little bit of cheekiness in the conversations. And I think the conversation is essential. It's the most important part of any tool, and it includes backcasting. It's not so much the end product, but it's the conversations, the different perspectives that we can hear from a diverse range of people. And in the Pacific, I think, with our values of respect, humility, and honor, it gives space to listen to others.
Beautiful, designed in a way for the Pacific, by the Pacific.
Got to say, by the way, overhearing that, it sounds like most of those are principles that could suit any culture or country or context.
That is true. There's a lot of commonality across values. I think in the Pacific, we live them on a daily basis. Sometimes people unpack them at conferences, but really in the Pacific, you're not going to get very far unless you're living and embodying those values on a daily basis. I hope that didn't come across as too arrogant.
No.
No, I love that. I'm just thinking there'll be people listening around the world who will think, well, actually, we could use some of that in our processes, particularly, people using processes that are quite clinical or quite devoid of context or quite sort of, process-oriented. Maybe sometimes there is a tendency to forget the people element, the cultural element, and the relational element when you're putting together these sorts of workshops and discussions.
And I think that relational element is the crux of the Pacific Pathfinder. It's all about who we know, how we know, and how we respect those who have knowledge and those who have emerging pieces of knowledge. And I think it's part of the Pacific Pathfinder is to help us to relearn those values and how we can bring them into a professional workspace. They're not just a community thing, but they are a way, they have a place in a professional setting as well as a personal setting. And I think that therefore the ease of using futures tools was quite evident in staff members who had Pacific backgrounds, and also our members from all the different countries that are part of SPC had absolutely no problem entering into the future and being able to share their past and their hopes and aspirations. Futures for us created safe spaces, and also the relearning of our strengths that perhaps have been diminished with other ways of working.
Yeah, well, and I'm sure that's reassuring or even inspiring for other people around the world to hear, particularly people from First Nations or indigenous cultures who may be used to being asked to put who they are aside when they get down to business. But in fact, you're saying that it's not only desirable, but kind of integral.
Absolutely. And I know that I've been to a number of meetings where they've hung a sign up on the door that says, "Leave your ego here." And no one does. No one does. It's part of our identity. But I think the Pacific identity really gives that space, the Nasara or the Talanoa, is that we're all equal in the future's space. Because it hasn't happened yet. But at the same time, as backcasting shows, we all have a role to play. And how are we going to play it for that preferred future to be achieved?
Wonderful, Sarah. Hey, let's get into backcasting. You've talked a bit about creating a safe space in the future. The future feels a bit safer because it hasn't happened yet. So tell me, how does backcasting work? Are you going to that future? Talk me through it.
Okay, and I'll lean into the actual exercise that we did at SPC for the strategic plan. So we start in the future. That's always a bit of a showstopper. It's like, but hang on, how did we get there? And that's exactly what backcasting is. It also has a tinge of, are we there yet? Are we there yet? Are we there yet? Which is fine. Because we do need to check. So the really important part of backcasting is to know where your future is, that vision, that end point that you're standing in and looking back as to the roadmap of how you got there. For SPC, our vision was already crafted by members around a 2050 Blue Pacific vision which goes around planetary health, prosperity and well-being for all. So we knew that we were there already. The question was, what was our part in shaping that future? And also, what did we need to do across certain milestones? And so we start working backwards. And with that, it was a conversation. We had prepared a few ideas of what might happen. Some a little crazy, some a little boring, some a little bit in between as to, it's a possibility. But all this at the same time, for the facilitation of that, was not to allow people to get into it's not possible because of X, Y, and Z, but also to think about what things can we influence at the same time. And so we have a number of concept boards because we did this online. It was during COVID, and the great tool to use an electronic blackboard because you can always come back to it and add, and you can also add anonymously if you've got one of that really whack ideas. And so from that we could see that actually whether it was it needed a political decision, whether we needed to have an investment in building up certain capabilities, whether we needed better coordination and connection to different peoples and organizations, all those ideas put on paper. And then through discussion, the chronological order, if you will, it's like doing things linearly, but people like structure, then sort of seeing if we do this, then this will happen. And that is basically backcasting. It's like if we all decide to work together in 2021, by 2023 we'll have this, and then by 2027, etc., etc.
So you started with a 2050 vision, and do you go back annually? Do you go back by decades? What are your timeframes to future back in?
Well, good question. We decided to do it in 5-year blocks to get lots of ideas, and then as the conversation evolved, it's very flexible. People said, no, we need the 10 years, or no, we need 7 years, and it's like, that is fine. Wherever you feel that your contribution towards achieving that the future state, put an approximate date. But we did think we did find that it's useful to have some key marker dates, so that it is meant to help ground people in achievable periods of time. Because I think for me, backcasting as a futures tool is an essential tool for grounding all of the forward-thinking ideas and ideation and bringing it back into, okay, so how does this actually look in practice? And so therefore having those timelines, they can be reflective of your own strategic plan or the 2050 strategic plan, but then we would need to come back at certain review periods. And it depends what's happening around us. Hey, Victoria, if we're scanning now the horizon, we can hopefully have an idea for some emerging issues that might influence our journey to the future state. We might have a huge disruption that adjusts the vision as well. And I think it's the agility of futures. It doesn't matter if we get knocked off the path. we find our way back. And it's not a perfect process. It's a series of conversations.
Where in the foresight process does backcasting fit in? You talk about it being sort of agile and can pick up and put down whenever, but is there a specific place that you feel it fits? Is it early on in a futures process? Later?
For me, I prefer it towards the end of the process. And so when preparing for it, there can be some assumptions that people have already tried some other future tools, like the futures triangle, like scenarios, but never making an assumption. It's always good to break it down, as some people might just need, like, hey, boss wants a roadmap to implement this, and you can jump in. But for me, it comes towards the end because everyone's had the conversations with colleagues, with partners, with members about the importance of the work that one is doing and what the vision of that looks like, what change we're going to make in this world. And so it's the "are we there yet?" question that backcasting comes. So that's where I see it on that end. And we've used it's for me, it does work more effectively in my experience after other tool usage, simply because people are comfortable, they have the mindset of being in a future state. And I think that's what we always have to remind ourselves of. We're so comfortable with futures ourselves after practice, we forget that asking someone to stand in the future is just like, sorry, what are you, smoking?
Yep, I hear you.
Mhm.
So you've talked a little bit about the milestones that you have to future back from. Can you talk us through? You've got the group in the room. Is it a large group? Is it a diverse group? Talk me through step by step the process that you go through with a group coming in to do this backcasting.
Ah, yes, the process, and you will find this in the Pacific Pathfinder. But really, what's really important is understanding who is going to be in the room and who isn't. And when I say room, I mean physically in a room or online in a room or hybrid. But the most important thing is to have people be comfortable and to really know the purpose of the exercise. So you're not just doing this for fun. What's it for, and how will we be using it afterwards is a great way to start the process. Also to test people's familiarity with futures, whether it's a yes or a no, that is fine. It really comes down to the facilitator and a little bit more research to make sure that everyone can bring their best selves to the conversation, and it is a conversation. And then also just preparing, have a vision. You've got your vision, hopefully. If you don't have a vision, then perhaps it might have a different outcome for the use of the tool. You'll spend more time trying to agree on your destination. And then also, ideally, you need diversity more than anything in backcasting. It's not so much about the number. Where size matters is the different perspectives, so that you can really see all of the different elements that are required to achieve the future state, the preferred future. We've done backcasting with 26 people in the room, with 40 people in the room, and with 8 is off the top of my head that I can remember. And I think you have to get a little bit more creative the larger the group. Yeah. To make sure that everyone has a voice, because that's really essential. And if it's a really small group, it's also enticing people to think about who else they can go and get involved in the backcasting. And if time is short, there's also what we have used in the past is 7 questions, which is basically an interview type tool that asks people 7 questions about their preferred future and what key actions required to get there. So less engaging, but also a supportive tool depending on what your resources and your timelines are like.
Oh, that's really interesting, Sarah, because I think that's one question that we get a lot as futurists. How do we do this quickly and how do we do it on a budget? So can you tell me a bit more about the 7 questions if you're using that as a tool to support people who have those challenges as well?
Well, we've only used 7 questions once, and that was because we needed to engage a large group of people in the Pacific that we didn't necessarily have a relationship with as the strategic plan folk. We were trying to get Pacific youth opinions on science, technology, and innovation at SPC. And we had no direct relationship with them, but we knew someone who did, and that was Dr. Memmer at the time. And so the hardest part of using 7 questions is getting the questions right. How do you ask a question that is going to provide people with the space to provide their responses, but also that really can inform and are useful, not just for a strategic plan, but for others working with young people in the region.
So Sarah, you're using 7 questions as a support tool when you're doing your backcasting. Are there any other supplementary tools that you like to draw on to get things moving?
I always like horizon scanning. It's probably my favourite because I do it every morning. I like to know what's out there and what could influence our preferred future. It could be a positive influencer in that, there's suddenly a whole team of futurists out there and futures has become, the go-to tools, or it could be a real disruptor of social unrest or another pandemic that we're not prepared for. And why include this in backcasting? It's just to, again, provide a little bit of colour to the exercise.
Bit of colour, bit of life.
A little bit of colour, a little bit of light, a little bit of why would you think that? And it's like when we don't think about all of the ripples of our actions, then sometimes we can be a little bit slower in achieving that future. The scenarios approaches are also useful around that space, usually before backcasting, about identifying what you really don't want to do or what don't want to happen, as opposed to is small changes, small incremental changes, is that adequate within the time frame that we have? And so I said it's a bit of a mix and match, and I always like to have fun, Victoria, with work. I mean, if you want to wake up and go to work every day, you got to have fun.
Yeah.
And I found that with sometimes with the resistance of backcasting, you can do a little bit of role playing into the futures, a bit of embodiment in that backcasting, and by that, it's really sort of having 2 people discuss what they're going to do in one corner and engaging with others to sort of like why something won't work or why something might work. I've also done it as speed dating, which is also in the Pacific Pathfinder. When you're stuck with people who are just tired, and doing futures is exhausting, and you're just trying to get to the last little icing on the cake for the process. It's like, all right, you're speed dating, you're in your 80s, and you're telling somebody that you've just really just had the most amazing legacy at your last workplace before your retirement. What happened and how did you get there?
So I do have more questions. We're talking about what you're doing through the future back process, through the milestones that you hit. How granular do you get at those milestones? So we're talking about what you're doing in 2040 now. Do we care what roles are in that you'll need for it to have got to this point? Do we care about who's going to be involved? Do we care about where it's happening? What's the level of detail at each of those milestones that you're trying to get to with the group?
So it changes. So the closer you are to the future, the less granular it is. And the closer you are to the present, the more granular it is. But you raise a really important point, Victoria, about framing it as to the key actors or the primary actors in those milestone action blocks. Because if we have it too abstract, it remains a pretty picture on a piece of paper, or it's there's little ownership of the process. So I think it is really important to have at least a sense of who is the key actor at each of the blocks that the working group identifies, and also that looping back as we progress through the years as to how has that changed. Are there new actors? Has somebody else come on the scene that can take things forward? How much more can we come back and recast the backcast to see what level of detail is needed? But also at the same time, again, it comes to the facilitator and the purpose of the exercise as to the level of detail. For me, if you try and get all the answers in one go, it won't be a quality product. It won't be as a top quality as it could be with a series of conversations, because things change all the time. But at the same time, just having the cornerstones of those roadblock is a negative.
Milestones.
Milestones. Thank you.
Yeah, I hear you.
Yeah.
You talk a lot about facilitation, Sarah. What makes a good facilitator of the backcasting tool?
Somebody who knows the audience. The last 5 years I was working with some fantastic facilitators and watching how they provided space and context and conversation to allow the ownership and the co-creation of the future. It was quite exceptional, and I think what really matters most is knowing your audience and being able to contextualize the exercise with their work, as was in our experience. If it's too abstract, you don't get buy-in. If it's too time-bound, you will get some slight irritation. But if you can provide purpose and connectivity to people's work, then you really get some great conversations. You can get some real innovative ideas and ways of saying, like, we can shift the dial completely if we all combine together and do something. So I think that's the facilitator's role, is to guide the conversation.
So just for those people that are listening that want to know how to upskill in terms of facilitation, let's get really action oriented. So to know your audience, to know who's in the room, hybrid or otherwise, what do you need to do? How do you get to know your audience before you go into a room?
Well, assuming that they've all signed up, then you know who's in the room. But also asking them to share a little bit about themselves. Not my name, my title, my key job, but also some like a little bit of homework, I like to call it. Just like, tell us something about yourself before you come in and what you'd like out of the exercise or your expectation. That allows you to do a little bit of background work if you're working with non-colleagues, but your stakeholders. A little bit of homework too in understanding why they've asked you there for futures, like what their expectation is for any, like, do you have the magic wand? Are you the unicorn we're looking for? And just being able to ground that a little bit. But yeah, it's just taking the time to listen. Again, I said that a little bit earlier. It's listening to what people need. It's listening to where people are, and I think we can all do that. It's just a natural state of being, but it does. And you can always have somebody within the community group or the group that you're engaging with to also sit with you for a pre-exercise to either explain if there are any tensions that there might be in the room or any specific interests. And it's again, it's not resource demanding, it's time demanding, but it does make for a very good 60, 90, 120-minute exercise.
Yeah, I love that. It's a way of priming, way of getting both yourself and the audience ready for a session like this. Sarah, I think it's really useful to hear about examples where it's gone really well using a tool like this with a group. But equally, I think the challenges are quite telling too. Can you think of examples where things have gone horribly badly and how you've dealt with it? Or even not horribly badly, but where has this been challenging and how do you manage that?
I think where it's been really challenging is when people have been tired because it's been stuck at the end of a workshop and they just want to go home.
Yeah.
And Futures is new. But we've been given an opportunity to introduce it and we really need their feedback on it. So you've kind of pushed through everything that I've just said as good tips. You've ignored all the good tips. You're under pressure and you go into a room where people are already a little bit aggro. They're tired, they're fatigued, they're done for the day. And then you go like, and step into the future. The future is yours. And luckily there were no eggs. But it looks
It's really
good.
funny. I imagine that might be a common problem because if I was programming, a range of workshops, then it probably would be natural to put futures last. What's next? And then also, if I didn't know much about it, I might think, oh well, this is kind of the more fun experimental one. But in fact, that stitches you both up because it means you're always turning up to an audience who are a bit weary, actually probably in the exact wrong frame of mind to be imagining.
Exactly.
Using imagination and some of those other tools you're talking about. So what's the lesson there? Put futures first.
Couple of lessons. Put futures first and do the homework. It's a bit like a trailer. It's like if you think of Netflix and you've got those little sound bites coming through, you get people excited. Create a little bit of FOMO. FOMO. So get a little bit of FOMO in there. And, do you want some life-changing experience? And then you get them in the room. But then again, you've had to done your homework to know what their expectations are. And so with that resistance that we had in the room for that really awful experience, Victoria, that's when I brought in speed dating.
Cool.
So I'm going all right, everyone wants to kill me. How I'm going to make them really want to kill me by pairing them up and flirting with each other. Flirting through my achievements through this backcasting exercise and then giving them those dates. But it was... we took our time to respond when we repackaged, but we had some of the greatest examples from that resistance and that fatigue. But again, it's lesson learned is even if there is a lot of pressure to complete something within a time, having the courage to say, could we just hold off a little bit to give time for people to rest or to prepare so that we can then shorten the session but really have value for the tasks that you want to complete as a team. So that was a bad one. Do you want to hear a good one?
Yeah, I want to hear a good one. Give us a good one.
So a good one is not from my own experience, but from a colleague who was working with young people in Fiji, and they wanted to create a strategic pathway for their youth group. And so they'd gone through through a number of other tools of using futures tools, and then they got to backcasting, and the colleague was like, okay. Again, they're getting a little bit tired, but as young people, as visual people, as very attuned to culture, how can I create a way of doing backcasting that is both enjoyable, but also encourages some really good ideas of how they can get to their preferred state? So she said, we're going to have a carver ceremony. And so we're here all around the bowl, ready to drink our kava. But before any of us can have kava, we have to know how we got here. So all of you, down to the front of the knuckle or the meeting house, stay there. I'm going to sit and look after the kava, and you tell me what you had to do to get to the bowl.
Cool.
And so that was just great. It was role-playing, laughter, somebody recording each step. And of course, people were jumping as far as they could to get closer to the kava. But as you looping back, Victoria, to how granular you needed to get, they got sent back by their own members to like, no, you've missed out. How do we get that far ahead without first seeing what we did here? So that was a really good exercise. And I think if you can find something that you can bring people around, a common love for that future, it's quite useful to get people to be playful.
Before we say goodbye, can you share with us any final tips or advice that you might have for people who are keen to learn more about backcasting, to play with it, to experiment with it? What do you want to leave us with?
I'd like to leave you with curiosity. Don't be afraid. Don't rush, but be curious. Understand your audience and the spaces and places that they're at to make your connection. Articulate the value of the exercise. Acknowledge that you might need to have more than one conversation. But most of all, have fun. The future is in your hands.
Thank you so much for your time. I've learned a lot. I will continue to learn a lot. We all will. And kia ora.
Thank you, Victoria. Ka whalongi tama.
Okay, Victoria, great chat. Like you said, very warm human being, incredibly smart person, and man, there was heaps to think and probably to talk about in that episode.
Yeah, really, I love hearing Sarah talk about backcasting. It's actually one of my favourite tools. It really highlights the need for us to do more and be more intentional than just setting a distant goal and hoping that we get there. It's a tool that helps us overcome what we call present bias, which is really just a fancy way of articulating that tendency that we have to focus on immediate gains rather than long-term outcomes. And that's really hard to do in today's world. We tend to focus on what's in front of us and reacting to that rather than proactively considering a vision, an aspirational one, and then working toward that.
As usual, we ran out of time. Anything that you didn't manage to cover in that conversation that you hoped to?
Oh, I mean, there's lots. I mean, I could talk to Sarah for hours about this. We didn't talk much about the limitations of backcasting in our conversation, but like with any tool, it does have some. Optimism bias is a biggie, and that's really what it says on the tin. It leads us to underestimate challenges and overestimate that likelihood of success in achieving our goal. So we often see with backcasting this tendency for people to gloss over potential obstacles or assume that certain steps or jumps, as Sarah talks about them, will be easier to accomplish than they actually are.
And what are the downstream effects of that?
So that can mean that we end up with unrealistic plans, really, that aren't fully accounting for complexities or uncertainties that might pop up along the way. So we really do need to build in ways to critically assess each step. So consider, what is the best case and worst case scenario or outcomes at each of those steps. And we might give a little bit more detail around that in our next episode, the bonus one.
It actually sounds like the process can be quite challenging, particularly for leaders.
Yeah, and we see that quite a bit. So we'll ask leaders to think out to a future vision, a 2040, and they'll recognise that they're not going to be around to deliver that 2040 goal, for example. So it's quite easy to be aspirational at that point, and it's only when you ask them to backcast and to step back what might need to be happening in the nearer future where they will be around, that can be quite confronting. In 2025, I will still be in this position, and I am accountable for taking the steps that are going to lead us to this aspirational
It's not going to be magic that it just happens in 2040. In fact, the journey starts now, and even though you won't be there to see it out, you are here to get it underway.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Participation was a theme that came up a lot in your conversation.
She talks a lot about that. She knows how to do it well. She knows how to support people to feel involved, to feel meaningful to the process. Good futures thinking isn't just a theoretical exercise that we do behind closed doors. It is participatory. It needs to be that way. We need a diversity of opinions and perspectives to shape futures, and to shape futures that are inclusive and fair and robust. And participation really is critical. Sarah talked a lot about that, right? When we widen participation, we avoid those pitfalls of groupthink, and we really start to open up possibilities that we might have not ever thought about before, and particularly if we were doing this on our own.
Anything else that stood out to you about the conversation?
Always interesting to hear Sarah talk about the role that indigenous knowledge can play in elevating this process. It's a way of thinking that fundamentally challenges the status quo. By integrating Indigenous wisdom, we're not only enriching our methods, but also reimagining the very systems that are shaping our world. So Indigenous approaches to stewardship, responsibility, interconnectedness, they offer us a more holistic way to consider the future, and one that goes far beyond all of these conventional legacy methodologies. And it really connects us to something bigger, to the land, to the environment, and to each other as well, I think.
And that's the benefits that Indigenous knowledge and approaches bring to traditional Western thinking. But as Sarah discussed, it's also really helpful for Indigenous audiences and participants who've been used to being told to leave the Indigenous stuff at the door to suddenly find that they're creating and collaborating using the stuff which is inherent to their perspective and their way of seeing the world.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just love the way that she brings those values into facilitation, and the way that she takes a tool like backcasting and really makes it her own, gives it a Pacific flavour. And it's a good opportunity actually to give a quick shout out to the Pacific Pathfinder, which you would have heard Sarah talk about in our conversation. So that's a toolkit that she was instrumental in designing to inspire more confident use of strategic foresight tools. And it includes 10 tools that have been adapted and are now being used throughout the Pacific. Really, really cool tool. Each is supported by a step-by-step how-to with case studies and tips and templates that you can cut out and print and use. And I have already had a good play. It is a beautiful example of Pacific wayfinding, building on Pacific strengths, traditions, knowledges, and experiences to help us navigate toward these desired futures. So seek it out. It is a wonderful asset, and I'm very happy to be able to share it with you.
Well, that's part one of our conversation about backcasting. Part two is an imagined workshop. That'll be our next episode, episode 6. Victoria's going to head away and start working on that, and we'll look forward to sharing that with you in a few days' time. In the meantime, keep your feedback coming. We love hearing from you. And thanks so much for listening to the Futures Workshop.
Ka kite, goodbye.